Dr. Pan's research interests including digital humanities and interpreting and translation studies, corpus-based interpreting and translation studies, interpreting translation and political discourse, learner factors in interpreting training, professionalism in interpreting, bibliometric studies, etc. Her publications are included in journals including Perspectives, Studies in Professionalism in Interpreting, Bibliometric Studies, etc. Her publications are included in journals including Perspectives, Target, Interpreter and Translator Trainer, as well as books as Routledge and Springer. Dr. Pan is now Honorary Secretary of the Hong Kong Translation Society and Chair of International Relations of the Hong Kong Association of University Women. She works as Managing Editor of Bandung, Journal of the Global South, and Review Editor of the Interpreter and Translator Trainer. She also serves as reviewer for journals including Journal of Translation Studies, Meta, Translators Journal Perspectives, Studies in Translatology, Target, International Journal of Translation Studies, Translation, Cognition and Behavior, Translation and Interpreting Studies, etc. At the end of speech, we will have a Q&A session, and Dr. Pan will answer questions from the audience. And now, here's our speaker today. Let's welcome Dr. Jun Pan.
Hi, thank you, Long Hui, for this lovely introduction. I'd like to, first of all, show my appreciation to Professor Michael Carr, who invited me to give the talk here. Originally, we planned to give the talk on site last year when I was visiting the United States, but unfortunately it didn't work out. I'm glad that we can conduct the forum online in this format. So just to check out, can you hear me clearly? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. And you can see, I'm trying to share my screen now. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So please let me know in case you have any difficulties hearing me. So I'm going to share my screen to you so that you can see the PowerPoint slide that I have, because it's a little bit too big. I tried to upload it earlier, but it doesn't work. So let me try the screen sharing. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So this is the title of the presentation, which has been nicely introduced by Long Hui already. So today we're going to move towards the journey of interpreting data mining from corpus-based interpreting studies, which may sound more familiar to most of you here. To start with, this is the structure of my talk today, and I'm going to start with an introduction to interpreting itself, as well as what consists of interpreting data. After that, I'm going to move on to the introduction of the mining of interpreting data, and I'm going to use 3 projects that I have been involved in to introduce to you what has been done already in aspects of as far as mining interpreting data is concerned. After that, I'm going to discuss with you the way forward, which needs all of you to contribute to, obviously. To start with, for those who are not familiar with interpreting, if you check in the dictionary, interpreting or interpret can refer to 2 different types of meaning. One of the meaning is used very, very often in philosophy and other disciplines such as music to explain or tell the meaning of something. And the second definition of interpreting is what we usually say within translation studies, that is the spoken form of interpreting. So in this study, we're talking about the oral form of translation as a form of spoken translation. So that's the definition we're going to use here, although the 2 definitions share a lot of similarities. If you check interpreting in Google Images, then those are the images you probably will get, because when we talk about interpreting, normally it refers to different types of interpreting, but nowadays, as you can see from these images, they refer to most often language interpreting, sign language interpreting included, and of course sometimes it refers to the case of machine translation or machine interpreting. So here's the official definition of interpreting given by Poach Hacker in both his 2 versions, of the book Introduction to Interpreting Studies. Interpreting is defined as a form of translation which is capitalized, and in this case translation includes both written translation and the spoken format of translation, which is interpreting. So in this case, it is a first and final rendition in another language, and it is produced on the basis of a one-time presentation of an utterance in the source language. So here, Pochhacker focused on the definition of interpreting from the perspective of a first and final rendition, that is the intermediacy of interpreting, and also the process of interpreting. And also another very important fact is that interpreting is a one-time presentation which cannot be changed, as the case of translation. So if we're talking about interpreting, we talk about interpreting through the history. And here I'd like to show you some of the milestones in the history of interpreting, which dates back to more than 3000 BC, which was the year when interpreting was documented and recorded in some of the historical documents in ancient Egypt. And there are some other milestones when the act of interpreting has been documented. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but you can see interpreting as a kind of discipline was sort of established in the 1990s. And this explains why, if you check Google Books and if you check the Ngram viewer of how often the appearance of language interpreter or language interpreting appear in Google Books, which is an online data mining tool for us to use, we can find that in most of the cases, interpreting or language interpreting in specific has been used after the 1960s, which explains the reason why interpreting becomes a kind of established discipline only after the 1990s. Now I'm going to move on to discuss the kind of data that we're going to use in interpreting, or what we call interpreting studies. In order to say that, I'm going to quote a painting by Chun Tae Chun, which was presented at Art Basel, Hong Kong last year. And the painting was named Language. And if you look at this piece of painting, it can sort of remind you of the kind of data you will encounter in interpreting. So to start with, in one of the earliest records of the interpreting activity by Goldman Eisler in 1972, there is a kind of visualization of the interpreting data. As you can see here, we have actually a picture representation of simultaneous interpreting. You can see the text, which is on the top, and then you have the translation. Actually, it's not translation, it's interpreting. So you have the source language, the sound wave of the source language, and then the sound waves of the target language. And then you have the source language, I guess it's French, and then the target language is in English. As you can see, this kind of visualization of interpreting data helps us to understand a lot of important concepts in interpreting. In this case, in simultaneous interpreting, we have this kind of ear-voice span. So you can see when we call simultaneous interpreting, it's not exactly simultaneous because the original speech starts a little bit earlier as compared to the target language. So that kind of span from the beginning of the original speech, which was produced, until the first segment of interpreting that was produced, is called ear-voice span. And this is the kind of visualization of the EVS, ear-voice span, by Goldman Eisler in one of the early studies in interpreting. Of course, there are different kinds of data that we can explore in interpreting. So just now you have had a look of simultaneous interpreting. In consecutive interpreting, which is the case when the original speaker speaks and then the interpreter only interprets during the intervals of the original speeches. Then in this case, interpreters need to do what we call note-taking. So notes can be very important data that we can explore into, especially learners' note-taking. Fortunately, with the collaboration of Michael, we have supervised a student who has recently completed an MA study, which focused on the analysis of the digital pen version of the note-taking of interpreting students. So this shows again that note-taking can be a valuable resource for us to explore in interpreting studies. There are many other types of data in interpreting studies as well. Of course, since interpreting involves, as we referred earlier, spoken language data, therefore sound waves can be very important data that we can explore into. So sometimes if you look at the kind of sound wave patterns, you can get a lot of useful information. Of course, interpreting also involves a lot of not just sound, but also a lot of facial expression and also the on-site setting. Therefore, another very valuable resource for us to study interpreting will involve video recordings of the interpreted events. So we're very fortunate because in Hong Kong we have the documented and also the video recordings of most of the government speeches, which are interpreted into Cantonese and Putonghua or vice versa in most of the occasions. And in the European Union, you can see on the right side of the PowerPoint slide, there are different language versions of the same language of the same document, and also the video recordings of similar interpreting events in the European Parliament. I'd like to quote an earlier study performed by myself as well as my colleagues. In that study, we tried to map interpreting studies, and we used journal articles as a database. So from a sort of like qualitative process of analyzing the interpreting studies in the previous journals, then we found that most of the studies focused on the research of interpreting as a kind of activity from different interdisciplinary perspectives, which include, as I highlighted here, A to F, starting from neuroscience to historic perspectives. So since interpreting has been studied from those kind of interdisciplinary perspectives, we are certain that the study of interpreting can certainly fit back into those disciplines. So when we study data in interpreting, then we can certainly contribute to not just this discipline of interpreting, but also multilingual communications, spoken language features, natural language processing, language therapy, intercultural communication, and all of the subjects areas that the interpreting activity has been involved in. Of course, we can use interpreting as a tool for us to look into the history, because if you look at interpreting, the long span of the interpreting related history lasted from 3000 BC to nowadays. And since the actual birth of the interpreting profession, which is conference interpreting, has been very, very relevant to technology itself, because without IBM, simultaneous interpreting wouldn't be possible. Therefore, technology has been associated with interpreting since the birth of the profession. I'm talking about the modern day profession of interpreting, the conference interpreting. Therefore, if we look into the data of interpreting, we can figure out how technology associated with interpreting has developed in the modern society. So just now we have went through very quickly the interpreting activity and the types of data interpreting that we can study. Now we're going to move on to the mining of interpreting data. I use quotation marks here because the studies I quote here are not actually data mining to a strict sense, but there are some sort of like baby steps, or what we're using as in the title of the presentation, some kind of work to break the boundaries to push forward corpus-based interpreting studies. To start with, let's look at the definition of data mining. Here I would like to quote Han, Camber, and Pei in 2012, that data mining is the process of discovering interesting patterns of knowledge from large amounts of data. So here I would like to emphasize 2 points. So first of all, if we're going to conduct any kind of data mining, large amounts of data is necessary. But how large is large enough? We don't know. So at the current stage, the more the better. The second feature of data mining involves the kind of patterns and knowledge which are interesting to most of the general public. Therefore, through data mining as a kind of process, we should be able to get a kind of visualization and also be able to communicate patterns and knowledge in a more efficient and effective way. So those are the two features that I hope that we can carry, we can bear in our mind, and also we're going to discuss them after we, when we are talking about those cases that we have later on. So as a comparison, corpus-based interpreting studies involves the construction of a corpus. So here I'd like to quote Volker and Pearson on the definition of corpus, which refers to a large collection of authentic texts that have been gathered in electronic form according to a specific set of criteria. Through this kind of collection of data, I'd like to refer back to this definition once more, because a corpus can gather authentic texts. Those are not just written texts, but also transcriptions of spoken data. So in this case, we can see that the development of corpus-based interpreting studies has picked up. Again, the year 1998 was very significant because Miriam Schlesinger proposed corpus-based interpreting studies as an offshoot of corpus-based translation studies. So in this seminar paper, she proposed that we should study corpus-based, the so-called corpus-based interpreting studies, which is different from written translation, corpus-based translation studies. Of course, she listed a lot of difficulties that we encounter in corpus-based interpreting studies, because the transcription and also the convention of the linguistic features to be included in a spoken language corpus is far more difficult or complicated as a written language corpus. But after 1998, there are two great milestones that can be shown in their two books that carry the names of corpus-based interpreting studies. So the first book on the left in blue, which is called Breaking Ground in Corpus-based Interpreting Studies, was published almost 10 years after Schlesinger's seminar paper. And the right one, which was published by Springer, is a more recent one, which was published in 2018. And then that one it carries the name of Making Way in Corpus-based Interpreting Studies. So what has been changed after this 20-year span? So back in 2011, Robin Sutton pointed out that corpus-based interpreting studies is a cottage industry. So basically, he was referring to the current the status back then that the subdiscipline was sort of fragmented, and they are performed by individual researchers most of the time. In the book of 2018, which I quoted earlier, Bendazzoli mentioned that corpus-based interpreting studies has developed into, which he put into quotation marks and also brackets, wild cottage industry. So this wildness is a very important feature that has changed the current status of corpus-based interpreting studies. So wild refers to the fact that more concerted efforts have been done in this industry. However, it is still a cottage industry. The reason why it's a cottage industry is because, again, it's fragmented, done still mostly by individual researchers, and also industry refers to the fact that a lot of work is still done manually. Of course, from the latest publication on corpus-based interpreting studies, we find that this subdiscipline has been developed much more quickly as compared to before, because now with more open access data of interpreters' performances, especially in the scenario of political settings. We have the development of modern technology, which can help us to transcribe spoken data into written text in a more efficient way. And also there are more tools for us to conduct multimodal corpora in interpreting. In an earlier review, which is done by myself and is going to be published very soon on the book I listed earlier on Making Way in Corpus-based Interpreting Studies, I tried to list all of the recent development of interpreting corpora. And here's a list of the corpora mentioned in that book. As you can see, most of the corpora, you don't have to read the small words. You can just to try to look at the highlighted words in yellow. So most of the corpora developed in Europe or on European data. And here is the list of the corpus size. The biggest size listed in that book is 360,000. As you can see, it's very big already in as far as interpreting corpora are concerned, but still not big enough if we are talking about data mining. Another feature, as you can see here, is that most of the corpora didn't mention whether or not they can be accessed freely online, or there's any possibility to access those corpora. Only two of them, the CEPIC and the CEPIC, has links for us to access. So this shows that, again, a kind of evidence of Bentazzoli's words that currently corpus-based interpreting studies is still a kind of wild cottage industry. Here's another quotation I'd like to use here, also from Bentazzoli in that book. So it is mentioned that currently the biggest interpreting corpus is one which is called the SIDB, and the size of it was 1 million word tokens. And also, as Bentazzoli predicted, insofar as CIS, corpus-based interpreting studies, projects are the responsibility of individual researchers. So if we continue to work as like a kind of fragmented research efforts that can contribute to, then it is unlikely that very large corpora can become available in the near future. So now I'm going to move on to the introduction of the 3 corpora projects that I was involved in to show you the kind of progress after Bentazzoli's words that was quoted earlier. So to start with, the CEPIC. The CEPIC was built basically because, as you can see from the previous review of the development of corpus-based interpreting studies, there is very small number of open access interpreting corpora. And in that case, we hope to be able to contribute to the following aspects, including data accessibility, annotation protocols, spoken data transcription, and the POS tagging for spoken language, because all of those are foreseen already by Schlesinger as the major obstacles for the development of interpreting corpora. CEPIC, the Chinese English Political Interpreting Corpus, is an open access corpus. It covers both Chinese and English language political interpreting. We hope through this corpus we can provide a possible solution to future collection of interpreting corpora. Therefore, we hope to be able to provide templates of metadata collection and the solutions to spoken data transcription and the annotation. And that's actually that's one of the reasons why we want to make this corpus open to all, so that other researchers don't have to repeat the work, and they can use the corpus directly in their own research. So this is the corpus. If you want to search for the corpus, is actually very easy. You just key in CEPIC HKBU or CEPIC Junpai my name in Google, and it will appear among the first 3 choices that you have. Otherwise, you can also scan the QR code here, and then you will be led directly to the corpus website, and then you can have a try of it when I'm delivering the talk or afterwards. So if you have accessed the corpus already, this is the main page you will be able to see. So as you can see, the first page of the corpus introduces the project itself. Do I have any questions? Here's some. Let me see. Oh yeah, thank you very much, Longhui. Basically, you can be directed to the website, and then you can check the kind of brief introduction to the CEPIC data. And I'd like to mention here, and also I would always want to show my acknowledgement and appreciation to my team members. because the construction of CEPIC is not easy. As mentioned by Ben Dazzoli, it's not easy for individual researchers to even reach the amount of 1 million word token in an interpreting corpus. And the CEPIC reached the size of 6.5 million, which is huge. And I believe it's so far the biggest interpreting corpus that we know to date. And we are very, very proud of it. And this can never be done without the collaboration and also the cooperation of those team members. And here you can see photos of our discussion, because the construction of CEPIC, as I discussed with Long Hui yesterday, took more than 5 years. The original idea came more than 10 years ago, and then it took us 5 years to collect the data with a group of dedicated researchers and student helpers. And it went through different phases of development because, as you can see from the photos, we have done a lot of working meetings to discuss the kind of transcription protocols that we should use, we should adapt, and we have people to check the transcription of other members of the group to make sure that they're consistent. So the whole process was a very, very tedious one. We tried to employ a semi-automatic process of data collection, but most of the work, I would say 80% of the work, is still done manually, partially because of the language involved, because Cantonese can hardly be transcribed automatically so far, according to our knowledge. So, and also since CEPIC contains a lot of paralinguistic data that we want to investigate into, therefore manual transcription is so far, or manual checking of most of the data has taken a lot of time of the team. So this is the word tokens of the subcorpora by language. I won't go into the details, but I'd like to show you the composition of the CEPIC by speech types. As you can see, the CEPIC covers 3 regions: Hong Kong, Beijing, US, and the UK. And we're trying to make it parallel to each other by including monolingual data as well as dialogue data. And as you can see here, for example, we have the policy address. We also collect the press conferences of the policy address in Hong Kong, so that we can compare monolingual data to press conference, which refers to the dialogue data. And we also included bilateral meetings in between China and the UK, as well as China and the United States. And the CEPIC covers both policy addresses and budget speeches. For the case of the PRC reports on the work of the government, it features both policy addresses and budget speeches. Since CEPIC is actually a digital humanities project, we hope to be able to communicate to people outside of the field of interpreting. Therefore, we used a very special feature of glossaries. So users of the corpus can actually use their cursor on some of the terms that appear in the corpus, and they will be directed to the glossary items, and it will help. So those glossaries help the people, especially they explain in layman's language what interpreting specific terms may refer to, and we hope to use this website to help people to understand more about interpreting as well. And here's an example of the CEPIC data. As you can see, we have the raw data and we also have the annotated data. So the raw data are collected from the government websites. So we tried different methods of web scrolling, and also we tried to collect official transcriptions from the existing government websites as a starting point. Based on that, we use annotated data. We add the spoken language features, and we also make annual transcription based on the videos and audios that we collected from official websites. So ideally, in CEPIC, each of the speech segment has 6 parallel versions that can be used as a kind of comparison. And this is the CEPIC interface. As you can see, we also included links to the original text and the videos for people who are interested in conducting more thorough research. And if they want to refer to the original sources, they can always refer to them. We also use the POS tagging. This is not the focus of my speech, but I would like to mention I'm working together with the 2 research assistants on the project, and we are going to report in the forthcoming conference on the semi-automatic process of how we use the past speech taggers in both Chinese and English to apply them in the corpus data that we have. And this is the search interface. As you can see, actually the CEPIC use different parameters. They are originally the metadata that we included in the construction of the corpus. So you can choose to search for a word in either the raw corpus or the annotated corpus. Then you can also choose other parameters such as part of speech or speaker gender. You can also decide the interpreters parameters, including interpreter's gender or language or the mode of interpreting. If you are interested in a comparison between CI and SI, then you can download the data and make a comparison. So the 3 main functions of the CEPIC includes keyword search, which I have shown already, and word collocation, as well as expanded word in context. So here I'd like to illustrate on the use of keyword search to start with. So if you are already on the website, you can choose the keyword interesting. The reason why I choose interesting because people think that politicians are the least interesting people in the world. So if you're interested in seeing how interesting they are, then you can search the word interesting to start with. And then if you choose speaker role as member of parliament in the UK, and the time span, which covers the whole time span of the CEPIC. And then if you choose the annotated subset, this will be the results you will see. Then you can see actually all of the interesting comes from those people listed here. What is interesting is that you can see 3 of the cases among the 4 records found from the same speaker, Tari Andrew, which indicates that maybe that person likes to use the word interesting very much in similar speeches. And the second feature of the CEPIC is word collocation. So instead of the traditional way of presenting word collocation, we used visualization like word clouds. So if you search interesting, then you will see those words relevant to interesting, the top 20 collocates of interesting based on this search. You can actually further click on the collocate to narrow down the search. So for example, if you have seen interesting, which generated the 20 collocates of it, and then if you move on to click point, then you will get the results of collocates for both interesting and point. For expanded keyword in context, I'm going to use the case of interesting as a second example. So if you choose interesting as the keyword and the location, if you choose this time Hong Kong, time span the same, and if you choose the raw subset, then you will have 2 cases of interesting done by 2 different speakers. And if you look further into the 2 cases, then you will see the expanded keywords in context, which shows the 6 parallel versions of the same speech segment. So here I'd like to use one of the examples to show you Tang Yinyan's rendition, Tang Yinyan's speech. So in this specific speech segment, Tang Yinyan used the word yao chui in Cantonese, which is the corresponding word of interesting in Cantonese. And you can see the Putonghua version is 有意思的, is a different word as compared to Cantonese. This shows the kind of differences between Cantonese and Putonghua. And the English raw and annotated both use interesting to translate the same word. What is interesting, really interesting here, is that if you look at the Cantonese raw and the Putonghua raw, you can see the 2 segments are completely gone. which means that if you check the official websites, you don't see any of those original texts at all, but they are actually included in the speech 到明年. So this shows the kind of differences between the actual rendition, actual speech, and the government's official transcripts. And it would be very, very interesting for us to look into the reasons why those cases are omitted in the official government transcripts. So there's some extra information that you can obtain for your search of the CEPIC. You can simply search it, or you can follow the manual, which is easily accessible on the website. And also you can, if you don't have an idea on what to check, you can check the high frequency words, which is presented in the more traditional way of corpus-based interpreting studies, for you to find out which are the highly frequently used words in each of the subsets of the CEPIC. So the CEPIC can be used for different purposes. For student interpreters, of course, they can access large database of high-quality Chinese and English texts delivered by native politicians and interpreters or translators. They can also use the CEPIC to prepare for their translation or interpreting tasks. They can even obtain online support during translation and possibly interpreting, of course, when there's a partner in the booth to help them to check the words. The CEPIC can be used by researchers to study interpreted language, to compare translation with interpreting, because the raw data is sort of like translation, and the annotated data is actually interpreting. Also, you can use the CEPIC to study political discourse. For other people, CEPIC can be used for language learning, because you can have 6 different, actually the written format of Cantonese, the spoken format of Cantonese, written format of Putonghua, Chinese, and spoken format of Putonghua, as well as written and spoken format of English. So you can have different language varieties. And some of my colleagues who do not speak Chinese actually used the CEPIC to study Chinese, and they can access the videos, the original videos, to follow the study as well. And you can use it to certainly to study politician language, to study spoken language, because you can actually search the fillers now. If you search then you will find all of the cases this filler is concerned. Of course, the CEPIC can be used for semi-automatic language processing, because with such kind of detailedly checked transcription and POS tagging, they can certainly be used for future use for any kind of machine learning, if possible. So the CEPIC data can be downloaded. The only terms of use is that you need to cite it, and we hope more people can make use of it. And we hope that you can join the CEPIC community by follow our Twitter and Facebook account. Of course, you can send us feedback and inquiries all the time. And if you have any publications relevant to the CEPIC, please let us know. We will include it on our CEPIC website. So here I would like to demonstrate how the CEPIC can be used for different types of research. So of course, CEPIC can be used for the purpose of, like most of the corpus-based interpreting studies. So this is a study that I published together with the collaborator of the CEPIC, and then we published an article in the general format of corpus-based interpreting studies, the keyword in context and also the frequency. But also CEPIC can be used in a more interesting way to help other people. Remember what I mentioned earlier about data mining, then people can need to find the interesting patterns and the knowledge through large amounts of data. So with 6.5 million, we believe that CEPIC provides an ideal starting point for us to explore in large amounts of interpreting data. So we can create word clouds based on the CEPIC data. So those are word clouds generated based on the Cantonese and the UK sub-database. And you can see they feature different words, but they have some shared words that are of high frequency as well. So this specific paper looks into the shared high frequency words of the CEPIC data. So this is the Cantonese policy address, the first 2, and then the second and the third refer to the translated version of the Cantonese policy speech. and the last two are the UK policy speeches. Then based on that, we can also make other types of visualization, like a kind of comparison across time. So in this case, we compared, like I mentioned earlier, the shared high-frequency words of we, government, and people in the subsets of the corpus across time. Then you can find interesting patterns. Of course, you can also use other visualization tools such as Lanka-Vox to help you to generate like collocation graphs. For example, here we have the collocation graphs of government in the subsets of the corpus, which can help you to understand what are the major differences across the different sub-corpora that you have. And you can even look at the development over time. All of the research findings are included in the article already, so I won't elaborate further, but I'd like to show you the possibility of visualizing large amounts of data. I'm now going to move on to the second project that we're working on, which is the CEPIC. It's a sister corpus to CEPIC. In this case, we're working on learner data. We hope to be able to collect up to 1 million translation and interpreting data in this case, and we're going to use concepts in the field of semantics to help us to annotate different types of lexical cohesive tools employed by learners. And we hope to, through the use of semi-automatic processing and even the possibility of automatic processing of the data, we hope to generate word clouds with the different lexical cohesive tools and also instances of the tools used by the learners. And we hope to, because the corpus collected data from learners ranging from the beginning level to semi-professional level. So we will be able to see the progression of learners, say, for example, the development of the mastering of the skills of repetition in interpreting and translation. So this is the work that we're trying, and then you can see it borrows a lot from the concepts of a word net. And the third project that we are working on is relevant to the involvement of the role of interpreters. So here, for example, if we search for big database, actually databases for data mining, such as Gale Primary, we can find the development of the usage of the word interpreter over time, which is marked in blue. And then if we compare the usage of interpreter and also similar roles to interpreters such as linguist and broker and mediator, we can find some certain kind of patterns. So in this case, we're breaking the boundaries really, because we are not confined by interpreting studies anymore. We are using data mining tools, and we'll look into the entire human knowledge and data to see what kind of role interpreting may play. As indicated by this graph, we can see the usage of broker has been increasing in recent years, and this is also in correspondence to the desired role of an interpreter as a language broker. So I have just introduced to you what has been done in the aspect of interpreting data mining. Back to the two key terms I mentioned earlier. So data mining, it should be based on large amount of data. So in this case, the CEPIC provides a very, very good example of how large corpora of interpreting studies can be achieved through collaborative efforts. And on the second point I mentioned earlier is that interpreting data mining should relate to the visualization of patterns and knowledge. Then I've shown you the kind of possibilities that all of the three corpora can help us to reach visualization and also to help us to communicate interpreting related data to the general public. Now I'm going to move forward to the final section that I have, and those are just the kind of blueprint I'm thinking at the moment, but of course, it involves each one of you here who will certainly contribute to the future of the data analysis in interpreting studies or beyond. So for practitioners, definitely we hope to be able to cover more text variety or more data variety in interpreting. We hope to have enhanced interface for better online support, and through such big corpora such as the CEPIC, we hope to be able to develop CAI, computer-assisted interpreting tools for interpreters. So those tools can aim at terminology generation, online interpreting support, etc. For researchers, we hope that we can develop, especially with collaborative effort of researchers from different parts of the world, we hope to be able to develop bigger corpus, more language combinations, and there's actually a possibility of integration of similar corpora. Actually Fernando, who is present here, he's now working together with me on his MPhil project, and we're thinking of how to integrate CEPIC with ECPC developed in Spain, and there's high possibility we can do it, because if you compare the CEPIC metadata with the ECPC, there are a lot of similarities. Another important thing is that CEPIC itself was developed originally in the language code of XML, and then we translated it back into a data frame. Now Fernando's work will involve the kind of translation in between the data frame and XML, and we hope to facilitate this process, because data frame can help us to communicate interpreting corpora to a larger audience, especially beyond the interpreting discipline. Of course, for researchers, we hope to be able to have better representation of multimodal data. For tool developers, we hope to move from semi-automatic process to a possibility of automatic process of data transcription, data tagging and annotation, and also the possibility of having better accuracy in data, video, text, data alignment. Of course, better visualization of multilingual data would be very, very interesting to explore as well. So here I'd like to show you the second version of CEPIC we're trying to develop. And I appreciate very much Michael's presentation back at HKBU in 2018, because after his introduction of the certain kind of methodologies, we're now trying to develop the CEPIC, the second version of the CEPIC, with the incorporation of videos. So definitely, in order to move forward, we need collaboration from all different people from different types of disciplines, not just TNI researchers, but also computational linguists, to developers, computer programs, and statisticians. I'd like to acknowledge the founders who helped us to develop the corpora mentioned earlier. And if you want to check for the related publications, please follow us on the CEPIC Google website, and then you can find a more updated list of the publications. So here's a list of the publications I mentioned. So I would be very happy to answer questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pan. We all enjoyed this amazing speech, and the work you have done for the huge CEPIC corpus is really impressive. Yeah. Now, Dr. Pan will answer some questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, then I will unmute you.
Mina has a question in the chat, and she's asking for Cantonese and Mandarin speeches. Are the English raw text official translations?
Oh yeah.
Yes. You mean? So let me see. The English raw text. Yeah, they are the official translations. Yeah. The English raw are what we collected from the government websites. So they are the official translations or transcriptions, because they are sort of like.
Yeah, Wiki, go ahead. Hmm? Oh, she has a connection problem, I think.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Is there any other questions? Susie, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. That was an excellent presentation. I was wondering about the speeches and the translations. Are there any processes of manual editing before, before they put into the alignment? If you understand what I'm saying, just like in the machine translation, that there's a pre or post editing, or those corpus are just ready to be processed. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Susie, for this question. So if I understand correctly, you're asking the alignment process. So you're checking whether or not we use the manual alignment or automatic alignment. Is it true?
Yes, I was wondering if there's any intervention, like if we need to edit before we dumped the text into the alignment.
Oh, yeah. For the development of the CEPIC, we started with the collection of the original data from official government websites. So those data are not aligned, but they are divided into different paragraphs. So in the original data collection, we followed the original structure of the paragraphs. And since they are not that different, we also tried different alignment tools, which doesn't work very well. So in the end, we used manual alignment. And since we have 6 versions of the same segment, so the process is that we import all of the text into a Word format. That is for the benefit of the student helpers who may feel it's easier for them to handle if they have a Word document. So we use paragraphs as the segmentation cursor, if we put it that way. And then when we translate all of the Word documents into an Excel, which is required by our library collaborators because we use the data frame, and Excel, which is similar to an Excel format. So we translate it directly into an Excel format, and then we check kind of alignment. So it's sort of like it involves a lot of manual work, manual checking. If I understand, if I answered your question.
Yes, that answered my questions. Also, you mentioned earlier one of the language cannot be transcribed automatically, so it means there's
Exactly.
lots of manual works. That my questions actually really, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
Can I have one more? Can I have one
please.
more? I saw about the hesitations too there in the audio video alignment, I think, that you show in the PowerPoint. So did you have to do anything with that, like editing, how to, or the software is already like automatically cut down those features? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Unfortunately, no. So we are trying to follow the TEI guidelines, and also I researched into the existing literature of the transcriptions for interpreting data, and we do have a very long manual for all of the student helpers and research assistants. So the manual is getting longer and longer because a lot of the time in the past 5 years are spent on the discussion of the transcription rules. So we have to decide which and what paralinguistic features to be included, and to what level that can be beneficial to both researchers in interpreting studies and perhaps beyond interpreting studies. So for example, in the case of pauses, so instead of marking the exact time length of the pauses, then we used a sort of like differentiation of the length of the pauses by the dots we use. So we have 3 dots 6 dots and 9 dots to indicate the different types of time lengths, so that if you put it into statistic analysis, you can compare like medium lengths of pauses to shorter pauses and see the surrounding segments and see how the context may come into play. And also we have discussed a lot of things like and and you know, those are different fillers. They can have different functions. So we have to make those transcriptions consistent, and machines cannot do this for us, unfortunately. Of course, for certain kind of transcription tools, they help us to annotate the but then you have to decide which version of the you're using. Therefore, a lot of manual checking and manual work has to be performed. And in the case of Cantonese as well, so the fillers like even or gum, they have different types of writing, even in the transcription system of Cantonese. So we have to check certain kind of linguistics. So that's the reason why I think we need help from linguists. So we have to check some linguistic books to decide which would be the exact word that we want to use in the transcription. In the forthcoming publication, I will elaborate on the annotation. So actually the annotated version of the CEPIC to show you examples of what kind of fillers we finally included and what kind of categories we included. So I hope to be able to give you a fuller answer in that paper. So please stay tuned. Once that paper is really, I hope that paper will be published by the end of this year, then we will be able to share it on the CEPIC website, and then for future developers of interpreting corpus, they can decide whether or not they want to follow the CEPIC transcription rules. So we do have like 50 pages of the transcription rules, and even for numbers as well, we have to keep the numbers consistent. So no, we couldn't rely too much on the machine. We have to use a lot of human editing work in this case.
Yes, thank you for the answer. I'll be looking forward to reading the article. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Go ahead, Michael. Carl, Dr. Carl.
Yes, thanks very much for the talk. I wanted to ask, go on with this. You said that you have some indications of pauses, and that you indicate with dots. Do you also have some more indication of temporal aspects of the speech production? So in the beginning, for instance, you mentioned this ear-voice span. Do you have some means to calculate this? So this would be one question I have, and another. Yeah, so maybe one after the other.
No problem. So actually, for the temporal aspects, we only covered the pauses in this current version of the CEPIC. So we use the dots differently. So we do have restrictions on the number of dots we use. We like for example, we have 1 second to 3 seconds and 3 seconds to 6 seconds, and anything longer than 9 seconds will be calculated as the longer version of a pause. So those are the only temporal aspect that we cover in the CEPIC, because as I mentioned, so we have to consider the possibility of the work, and also back then, especially years ago, we didn't really have the support of the tools that are so well developed nowadays. And in that aspect, I should thank you, Michael, again to thank you for your introduction of the usage of ELAN. We are developing the second version of the CEPIC now. Actually, we have tried it in the development of the two bilateral meeting that corpora that we developed. So we used it to transcribe both the Chinese version and English version of the data, and we found it quite useful. So in the second version of the CEPIC, we hope to be able to include more temporal aspects. So like you mentioned, the time frame and also more accurate calculation of the pauses, which we can use. We can use automatic process because of the tool. Yeah.
So you have a transcribed version, and in parallel you have the texts or the audio signal too. We can have access to both versions.
Yeah. So exactly. So actually, the second version of the CEPIC, which is still under development, will look like. Let me share my screen once more. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is actually the version 2 of CEPIC that is under development. So you will have the video if we have access to the video. If we don't, then we will include audio here, and then you will see the time span, and then this is the interpreted version. Then you will have the hesitation, all of the annotations of the CEPIC. We included, so we're going to translate them back into the ELAM version.
And you will have already the transcription there too in time. So this is
can you say that?
The Chinese characters are transcriptions of the speech, I guess.
Yes.
You will,
yes.
You will
Oh,
have
you're talking about the time when the speeches are delivered?
Yes.
Oh,
so
yeah, we do. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, we do have the time. So, for example, if you do any kind of keyword search, then you will have the year of the speech listed on the top left. So those results can be downloaded in an Excel format, and also on the CEPIC interface. Let me show you one more example here. Sorry. We do have the exact date when the speeches are delivered, and this is the CEPIC interface. And if you look at here, you can choose the time span. So, for example, if you want to see how freedom is used during the time frame, if you don't want to cover the entire corpus, then you can choose 1997 to 2017. And then you can find, like, you can compare, for example, every 7 years. So 1997 to 2011, and then after that. So you can choose that. And the second possibility for you to find the time information is through keyword in context. Because if you have the keyword in context, then you will have this metadata information of expanded context, and then here you have the date. So this is the exact date when the speech was delivered and interpreted. So for each search, then you can generate sort of data like this. Is that what you want to ask, Michael?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My second question, if I still may,
yeah, please.
is that I understand that you have exclusively interpreting data or spoken translations there in your database. And I was wondering that it might be interesting also to compare this with other translation modes, written, for instance. Or do you think this is interesting? This could be interesting, for instance, to compare, I don't know, different lexical choice or syntactic structure and so on in different translation modes. Do you see a possibility to get such kind of information from your database?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the raw data, they are the official translations by the government. And that they are, although we don't know, but there is a high possibility that the interpreters have access to those raw data listed in this corpus. So those official translations, they do any kind of interpreting. So those data we marked as raw because they are not just translations, official translations provided by the government, but they are used as raw materials by most of the interpreters, especially in the monologue mode. So for the annotated data, they are the spoken language data. They are the interpreting data. So if you compare, so if you do any kind of search when you mentioned the lexical choice. So for example, if you choose interesting on the website, and then if you want to use the different types of features, that is fine. So if you want to search for, say, for example, interesting in the entire corpus, you can choose raw, and then you can download all of the cases of interesting in the raw data. And then you can choose interesting, and then you choose annotated subset. And then you can download all of the cases of interesting in the annotated subset. And then you can compare them in a parallel version. And then you can see the kind of differences. Of course, you can see the lexical choice difference. So in this case, English raw and English annotated, which means that the translation and interpreting used the same word, say, for example, interpreting. But there is possibility, for example, if you look at the first sentence, as far as poverty is concerned, is the written translation. But the interpreters use a different version, as far as poverty, sorry, it's the same version, I'm sorry. There may be other cases that the actual wording of the interpreter may be different from the translator. So in this case, they used the same kind of wording, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat. Wendy, she asked you how to distinguish the different levels of students' proficiency in the example.
Sorry, can you say that again?
How to distinguish the different levels of students' proficiency in the example.
Oh, so in this second corpus, CEPIC, we're developing, we are collecting data from students of different stages of interpreting and translation learning. So there are two schemes that we're using now. So for example, we collected data from first-year translation program students to second and third and fourth year. Usually the undergraduate students in Hong Kong go through 4 years of formal translation training. So we collect the data from each of the year. And that will be used as the first parameter. And the second parameter we use is how many previous translation or interpreting courses they have taken, or the stage of the interpreting or translation courses they are taking. For example, students from, in our case, we have interpreting 1, 2, 3, and 4 as the course names, which will be very, very easy for us to differentiate the learners' proficiency levels. So 1 will be beginner, and then 4 will be semi-professional interpreters in this case. So we use all of those parameters, and so we hope to be able to develop an open access in corpus similar to the CEPIC, so that the researchers can decide which parameter they want to use. They can choose either year 1 to year 4, or they can choose like how many previous interpreting or translation courses they have taken, or the exact level of the courses they are taking as the resources of the data collection. So is that what you want to learn?
Yeah, it's from the question from Wendy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If that answers your question. Okay. Okay, good. And if there is other questions, is there any other questions? Okay, Naive.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this very interesting talk. I have a question. You mentioned briefly the perceived role of the interpreter and the change over time. So do you think that this corpora could be used in a way that we could generate perceptions of the changing role of interpreters over time, just focusing on this corpora?
You mean the role of interpreters?
Yeah, you mentioned like the role of the broker and how that changed, right? So do you see an application for the corpora where this could be possible? Let's say, for example, from analyzing the way interpreters interpret, that could give us an insight in how they perceive their role, right? So I'm thinking, is it possible to do that through the corpora?
Yeah, that's exactly the purpose of the corpus. So we hope to be able to collect documents. So we used like Gale primary sources as the tool for analysis in this case. But in the actual development of the corpus, we hope to be able to select the data that we have to make it more an accurate reflection of how interpreters are documented in the history. So the purpose of this study is because we want to look at how interpreters' role evolved in the past 2 years. So based on this graph that you can see, you can see the usage of the word interpreter has been fluctuating in the history, and the usage of, say, for example, linguist and interpreter. If you look at the period of 1980, then you see a shared increase of actually they share very similar patterns. So this indicates that the role of interpreters may have similar fluctuations as compared to the role of linguists. And then if we look into the document, we hope to be able to analyze the text, and we're going to look into the text and see what kind of reasons may lie behind this kind of fluctuation of the appearance or the frequency of mentioning of interpreters as compared to linguists, especially when they're happening in a parallel way. So we hope to actually the main purpose of such kind of mining of the documents on interpreters instead of actual interpreting transcription, or so this is the kind of data which is different from the previous two corpora we're talking about. So this is a corpus of documents on interpreters or interpreting. And we hope to look into the historical involvement of the role of interpreters through this corpus. We hope to be able to use quantitative methods to analyze it, and we also hope to be able to visualize the qualitative analysis of it. So this is what we are working on, and I believe it will generate very interesting patterns and comparisons of the involvement of the role of interpreters. Another possibilities for us to look into the history of the development of interpreting as compared to, say, for example, technology or AI, because technology is very, very relevant to interpreting itself, especially with the birth of conference interpreting, which is associated with the development of technology. Without the SI equipment, we won't be able to provide SI services at all. So it will be very interesting to see the kind of correlation in between interpreting and technology, or interpreting and AI. So we will be able to put interpreting into the general picture. And this suits the purpose of data mining. This is closer to the kind of data mining that most of the data miners are talking about. So we hope to be able to generate interesting patterns and knowledge about interpreting. And so we're not restricted to the point within interpreting studies, but we're looking from outside of the discipline. So this is what we hope to be able to achieve in the last project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I saw there is a chat. Inmates that maybe the gender of the interpreters can be added. I think it's included, right?
Yeah, the interpreters' genders are added. So you can actually search the CEPIC. Let me show you the CEPIC website. Yeah, so this, can you see the CEPIC website?
Yes.
Yeah, so for example, you can choose interesting. Interesting may not be a good example. Let's use freedom. And then you can choose here, interpreter's gender, and then you can search it, and then it will give you all the cases of the female interpreter's production of freedom. And if you choose male, then you have a different search output. You can even search among CI. So if you search CI, then that's it. And then you can also choose, if you, in this case, you have to return to the main search and then come back to SI. And for those who don't know interpreting, you can always click the information icon, and then it will lead you to the explanation of the terms. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Okay, I think it's good now. Oh, Susie? Okay.
I hope it's okay. Just one more. It's just that it was interesting that you mentioned about the correlations between interpreting and AI, interpreting and technology using corpus-based, and to generate how it will be future research. Can you elaborate more on that? I mean, what kind of avenues that would be visible to investigate? Thank you.
Yeah. So, for example, in this last slide, actually I included an extra one, but I accidentally deleted. So I included terms such as AI and Nuremberg trials. Just to try, I was just trying to explore the possibility of the. Sorry, I'm not sharing my screen now, right? Am I sharing my screen?
No.
I'm sorry. Let me show you another example very quickly. Can you give me 1 minute?
Sure.
Yeah. I do have the relevant findings. It was presented at a different place, so I didn't really include it here. Yeah, I do have the visualization here. Let me show you my screen now. Yeah, so this is the visualization of it. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the second trying, I put in interpreter, mediator, brokerage, which was wrongly input. So that's why I deleted this slide. Linguist, and I put in REIC, Paris Peace Conference, which are relevant to the historic events of interpreting. I listed in the previous slide on the history of interpreting. Nuremberg trials, which leads to the direct birth of simultaneous interpreting. IBM, also clearly relevant to the birth of interpreting as a profession and AI. Then you can see the results by the different icons. So you see AI, the fluctuation of AI, especially after 1980s, goes in this case against IBM. So IBM rises and AI lowers down, but then in this case they are rising at the same fluctuate in a similar pattern, and they go more or less either close to the development of the wording of brokerage or interpreter in different cases. So those are the points, especially here you can see AI and IBM both dropped in the year 1980. So those are the points that we want to further explore into. So we want to see how come that IBM and AI dropped around the same point in the same year. And this can lead us to think about the kind of role the different types of historical events play in the development, in the evolvement of the role of interpreters. So this is what we hope to be able to see. But of course, we now have the visualization of the quantitative side of the data. What we need to do is really to look into the qualitative side of the data to see the reasons behind the different types of fluctuation of the appearance of the words in the historical documents. I hope that provides some food for thought.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is very interesting. The IBM and the IBM and the AI correlation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And any other questions? Okay, if there is no other questions, then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much, Long Hui.
All right, thank you again, Dr. Pan. This is a very great presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you all for your attending.
Yeah, thank you for your participation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Happy Lantern Festival to all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, almost done. Okay. See you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Thank you, Long Hui, for your wonderful moderating.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is very informative. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope it helps, and I hope more can make use of the CEPIC.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too.